If nothing else, this is a very interesting film. The plot is interesting. The depth and lengths they took when making the movie are interesting. It coming out of nowhere is interesting, and the director choice is kind of fascinating. So, regardless of whether you wind up liking this movie or not, and we'll get into what I think about it in a minute, I would highly recommend seeing it. I'm going to warn you, though, and we'll go through some spoilers. This movie is profoundly disturbing. It's really, really weird. Despite it technically being a horror film, until like the last part of the movie, I didn't find it particularly scary. It was more just kind of disturbing and unnerving. As with a lot of movies, I, as a rule, don't watch movie trailers unless they're before a movie I'm seeing in theaters. Because I just found as I got older, movie trailers, they put more and more and more of the film's plot in it. Like, basically, the trailer will summarize the plot up to the final twist. And the final twist will be like the last 5 minutes. So, trailers will often give away 90 to 95% of the movie. So, I generally try to avoid watching them. And I avoided reading any spoilers or any plot summary. So, if you're going to go see this movie, I'd recommend maybe turning this review off. But that being said, let's continue. So did I like this movie? Yeah, this movie was incredible. It's very strange, it's very unconventional. It kind of has a lot of like almost kind of like art movie things, but it's not boring, it's not minimalist, it's just very fascinating. It's kind of a smarter, more highbrow horror movie than I've seen in a long time. You can tell they spent a lot of attention to detail. They put a lot of research into this, and they took a lot of time, like with the set design and basically everything about this movie has very high production value, especially for something that only cost $10 million to make. But for whatever reason, horror movies always have very low budgets. I think it's because rather than really care that much about getting big actors on board, they just get like the hottest girls they can find for the cheapest they can find, and that tends to be how they make these movies. So let's kind of get into the plot. What is the premise of this story? So just at the beginning of the film, like the pre-credit scene, we get this girl Danny, and no, she doesn't have three dragons, in America, and she has severe anxiety and depression issues. And she receives an email from her bipolar sister threatening suicide. So she just thinks that this is like her sister doing it again. Her sister does this all the time. To be fair, if you've ever like seen me on Discord, I do this too. It's with bipolar, you just have very, very sudden mood swings that completely change your outlook on the world, and it's pretty clear her sister's not taking any medication. So, meanwhile, we cut to her boyfriend Christian, who's hanging out with his friends, and they're basically telling him to dump her because she's not fun to be around. She's not like funny or likable or anything. She's not even super attractive, and she won't have sex with him. So they're like, why are you even in a relationship with her? All it is just an unhealthy emotional dependency. You give everything to her, and she doesn't do anything for you. And there is a very deep and obvious resentment throughout the movie of him towards her, which I think is very understandable. And that's kind of the first interesting moral quandary in this movie, especially once I get into kind of some more of what happens to Danny. Is it really his job to stay around and try to make her feel special and try to make her feel loved and to try to deal with her personal problems? Or should he just be getting out because she's a complete basket case and the relationship is making him miserable? It's not like he's married to her or anything. And I don't know how serious the relationship really is. So they're talking about breaking up, and what winds up happening is her sister kills herself and her parents in a really disturbing way, and this kind of immediately ticked off a bunch of boxes. I'm like, this is going to be a good movie because this is really well done. So what her sister did was she took a like a really long tube from the car exhaust and she put it under her parents' door, so they died of carbon monoxide poisoning. And then she duct taped the tube to her mouth and also killed herself through carbon monoxide poisoning. It's just a very creepy scene. So Danny undergoes a complete and total mental breakdown, and Kristen, out of guilt, stays with her because he feels that if he leaves her, she's going to commit suicide. Now, once again, this is just making the relationship even more unequal. It's him doing everything of value, and her just taking from him. And you got to wonder: is this healthy? Is it his responsibility to try to deal with her? And I think there's a case to be made that he should leave her, and that if she winds up killing herself, it's not exactly his fault. He didn't like abuse her and cause her mental issues. He didn't kill her parents, and it's not, he's not married to her. So it's kind of an interesting question. What is his actual responsibility to her? So that winds up happening, and then we find out that his friends and him are planning to go to Sweden because they've been invited by a Swedish guy from a small village who they met in university to go there and to participate in a Midsommar festival, which only happens every 90 years. So the various group of friends are all anthropology students. They want to go there and study it. And out of kind of a sense of guilt, he invites Danny to come with them. So all of them go to Sweden, and we kind of begin to see there's a lot of good foreshadowing because she has a conversation with the Swedish guy, and he's the only one who actually wants her to go. And he's like says to her, "You're the one I really wanted to come, Danny. I'm glad that you're coming with us." So they get to the village in Sweden, and the first thing they get is a bunch of people come out in like white. I don't know how you want to describe it, like white traditional clothing, and they offer them mushrooms, and they just immediately take the mushrooms, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of a bad idea. Like, so you just show up at this like random village in the middle of nowhere, and they give you these mushrooms, and you just kind of eat them. And you have kind of a couple cool scenes of them kind of getting high. Danny has a bad trip and like collapses on the ground. And this is one of the first times it happened. And I was watching this with a friend, and he told me that this movie, like the scenes where they're high, are accurate depictions of what it's like to be on acid. So that's interesting. Although, to be honest, something about this film is unlike something like Annihilation. You don't really get the sense that what they're experiencing isn't real. It's more their reactions aren't real, or the reactions are really weird than anything else. So they arrive at the village. It turns out that the village sells drugs, homeopathic remedies, and hydroelectric to pay for everything. So they kind of live at this interesting mixture of like new and old technology. All the people sleep in this big bunkhouse together, although there's a place for the elders. And it turns out they have this system where from 0 to 18, they learn. From 18 to 36, they go on a pilgrimage, kind of like the Quarians in Mass Effect, to bring something back to the village. 36 to 54, they work. 54 to... Geez, my math is bad. To 72, they teach. And then after that, the guy jokes. He's like, "Oh, we just killed them after that." And everybody awkwardly laughs at the joke. So we get a couple scenes of them playing games. They eat some more meals. They take a whole lot of drugs. There's a black suit guy with them, and he decides that he wants to stay and study the village and study the festivals and stuff for his thesis. And Christian also decides to do that, but he doesn't tell Danny, of course. So you got to wonder, how is this going to go for the relationship? Is she going to stay with him? Are they going to break up? It's kind of just something they throw out there to be a bit of a red herring. So over the course of the day, you have these two old people who are kind of the center of the celebrations. They get the best food. They get honored by everybody. They eat first, and everybody starts eating only after they've started eating. So then we find out what this whole thing is about. So everyone comes and stands at the base of a cliff, and the older people go to the top of the cliff, and I'm sure you can guess what's coming. They jump off the cliff and die. One of them doesn't die, so they take the sacred hammer and bash his head in. And they talk about how, this is more humane than sending them to old age homes, and they get to have this honorable ceremony before they die. And it's funny because like the anthropology students are all like these ivory tower academics or whatever you want to call them. So they're like, oh, okay, this is cool. We can't judge them in their culture. And then there's this the other people who were brought there by someone else. Were like, this is disgusting. This whole place is fucked. We're gonna leave. So they leave the next morning, but it's pretty obvious something happened because they disappear. Like the guy leaves without his fiance, and then the fiance leaves, and there's like no actual evidence that they left, and it's pretty obvious that something happened to them. So they burn the tree down. No, sorry, they burn the bodies and they put them on a sacred tree. There's kind of an American Pie moment. Is kind of the wannabe jock, the wannabe player, the nerdy wannabe player. Sorry, uh, pees on the tree. So his days are numbered because he disrespected all their ancestors. So it turns out that the village has an oracle that's produced as a result of inbreeding, and he just scribbles like with crayons on a piece of paper, like in a book, and they interpret that as a way to tell the future and decide like who they're gonna like what they're gonna do, which is really weird. So they ask to take a picture, and they say no. In the middle of the night, the black guy sneaks in and starts taking pictures, but he gets beaten to death with a hammer. Also, the jock guy gets called away by a Swedish milkmaid to have some fun activities, presumably. But we don't see him again for a long, long time. So now we're just left with Christian and Danny because everybody else left. Christian doesn't seem particularly concerned, and the fact that they keep giving them drugs seems to help matters considerably. So we then get to kind of we're nearing the climax of the film. So Danny enters a competition to become the May Queen, and I'm kind of leaving it out because I'm trying to get through this. But there's a lot of talking in this film, like where they discuss the various traditions. They talk about what it means, what it represents, all that kind of stuff, and it's kind of interesting from an anthropological perspective. People I've talked to who know a bit more about this stuff say the movie's pretty accurate about what pre-Christian Scandinavian beliefs were. And having watched this movie, I have to say that I'm really happy my ancestors left Scandinavia. Although they're from Denmark, but that counts. Left Denmark and moved to Normandy in France and converted to Christianity. I'm really glad they left all this stuff behind because it's really goofy and it's really creepy. So the May Queen, so they have to dance around the maypole, and the last person there gets crowned May Queen. So Danny, of course, being the protagonist, wins this. They gave her some more LSD beforehand, so she's super high. They then have a dinner where she leads it, and they give her more drugs. Kristen's had multiple shots of drugs at this point, so like large portions of the movie, they're just high and they just act in really weird manners, but they're stupid, so they keep drinking the stuff. Like after you start to doubt and go, maybe these people like are bad. Maybe these people like we had all our friends disappear. Maybe we shouldn't be taking like random drugs for them. That might be a bad idea. That might be a really really bad idea. But they decide not to do that. So the whole movie, this some redhead is trying to get Christian to breed with her. So after giving him some more drugs, she lures him away from the table, and she leads him into a barn where she's lying there completely naked with her legs open, and there's a bunch of like old and young women who are naked and dancing around, and he's so high he has no idea what the hell's going on, so he has sex with her. This is how one of the ways they prevent incest is they lure men in from other parts of the presumably Nordic world or whatever, Nordic Germanic world, and have them have sex with the local people to help bring in some fresh genes. Who knows if any of them survive, though. So as he's like finishing off, Danny stumbles into the barn and finds him fucking this girl, and she gets really upset. And I think she passes out for drugs. And Christian runs away, and he finds the guy who had pissed on the tree. No, he finds the black guy buried in a garden, and he finds the guy who had pissed on the tree, uh, like skinned, and he has like the spread eagle, like where they cut open your back and that kind of thing. So he then gets hit with a bunch of powder that paralyzes him and makes him completely unconscious. So he wakes up, and Danny is like on a dais. She's wearing a crown. She has this massive robe made out of flowers. So we find out that every 90 years they sacrifice 9 people to the gods, or as I'd say demons, in exchange for continued prosperity. So they killed his friends, so that was a couple sacrifices. They killed the Pakistani couple who had tried to get out earlier. They killed a couple people from the village, and she, as the May Queen, has the option, has the responsibility of choosing the last person, some random dude from the village chosen by Lot, or Christian. Now, this is probably the most controversial part of the movie, because obviously she chooses Christian. The movie wouldn't really have a point if she didn't. And he gets killed by they gut a bear, and they put him inside of the bear, like the bear's like corpse, and then they, still paralyzed, put him in this temple thing. And actually, the image of that is on the screen right now. And they put them in there with the other people, and they burn them all, including burning 2 of the villagers alive. And the film ends with the camera zooming in on Danny, and her expression turns from being disturbed to being happy. And so that's the end of the movie. So, I mean, you can interpret the end however you want. A lot of people will probably blame Danny. I've seen people say she's a thought, she's a traitor, she's evil, all this kind of thing. I tend to not hold her particularly responsible, nor do I hold Christian responsible for cheating on her. Because to be fair to him, he was high out of his mind. They had given him like 3 or 4 different hallucinogenic drugs. Also, Danny was high out of her mind and terrified. Like, her sanity wasn't exactly she wasn't exactly stable heading into here. And after seeing all the weird stuff, taking all the hallucinogenic drugs, and seeing her boyfriend engage in this really creepy, disturbing sex ritual, it kind of makes sense that she'd snap on him. So the question is, like, what's going to happen now? Is she going to stay with them and become like part of the tribe? Are they going to kill her next? Who knows? But that's the ending, and it's not a bad ending. This whole movie I thought was really good. I'd really recommend seeing it. They put a lot of effort into like researching the rituals. The acting is really good. The script's really good. You don't really know where it's going until the end. It was kind of funny because the scene before the sex ritual, I'm like, why does this movie get an R rating in Canada? The R rating in Canada is actually the highest because we have 18A, which is kind of like the American R. So R is kind of like adult only. I'm like, how did this movie get adult only? There's no nudity in this. And then it immediately cuts to a bunch of naked old women dancing while he has sex with probably an underage girl. Like I said, this movie is really disturbing. But yeah, not a movie if you're squeamish or easily upset, but definitely a cinematic masterpiece. I give it a 9 out of 10. Great film, one of the best movies of the year. It might actually be movie of the year unless something better comes out. Anyways, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the review and plot summary. God bless. This is Argent. As always, we must ascend.